Modern science sees only an unconnected universe, with planets, stars, and galaxies separated by empty space. This unconnectedness has led to the inevitable conclusion that the bodies in space are lifeless. Science denies even the possibility that the objects we see in space could be alive and intelligent. Dr. Michael Claridge of the Sapphire Project explains.
The idea that life or intelligence would be attached to a planet or a star was too much for our consciousness, so we denied its possibility.
According to Dr. Claridge, there is no scientific basis for such denial. Denial without evidence, in fact, is contrary to the scientific method.
There was never any evidence to substantiate that denial. And I don't need to tell the people in this room that denying a star could be alive is a misuse of the scientific method.
In today's cosmology, everything is dead. Until this absurd denial is cast aside, there will be no progress.
The cosmology that we grew up with is dead. And I don't mean dead as in over with. I mean it only talks about dead things. Stars are supposedly dead. Galaxies are supposedly dead. The whole universe is supposedly dead. And only you and I are alive. Only you and I. The profoundness of this absurdity needs to be re-examined. Astrophysics will be stuck until it can acknowledge that the objects it studies are alive, just like you and me.
New images from space belie the premise of an unconnected and lifeless universe. Indeed, the structures and processes found in biological systems are found in space as well.
As we collect more and more data from ever more awesome telescopes, there's a notable confusion if we are looking at biological images or astronomical images. One of these is a micrograph of a cell. One of these is new data from the interstellar medium. Same. One from the interstellar medium, one from the world of cells. Same thing, interstellar medium, world of cells. This is my favorite. Two of those are from the world of biology, two are views of something going on in our galaxy. So this is not an accident that they look the same, and it's not an artifact of our instruments. The reason these two worlds look so similar is because in many ways they are similar. We live in a living universe.
Biological systems themselves are intelligent down to the cellular level. Biological processes are purposeful and orchestrated and cannot be the result of random, unorganized forces.
This is an image of an animal cell, and it's what you would see with your eyes, with visible light. And when I was young, I was told that all those little functional pieces, mitochondria and the Golgi apparatus and the lysosomes and all those functional pieces, I was told that they float around randomly in an unorganized sack of water. And it was assumed that random, purposeless motions were somehow accomplishing all the required millions of complex biochemical reactions for cellular life. For example, if new amino acids came in from the right-hand side of the cell, but they were needed on the left-hand side to do something, that somehow they would just meander over to where they are needed. And it was actually known that random diffusion was about 1 million times too slow to account for the speed of biochemical reactions, but it was forbidden to propose any model where the cell actually knew what it was doing and why it was doing it. Then, in the 90s, we developed fluorescent dyes to attach to a different set of biological molecules than we could see before, and that's what the cell looked like. And I was in graduate school when this work was being done at a different place, and everybody is like, what are we looking at, right? And then after just a few years of research, we uncovered that these different filaments on the right-hand side, they're actually holding together all the pieces of the cell and moving all the pieces of the cell around. And by watching further, we could see that raw materials like amino acids or whatnot when they're brought into the cells, they're packaged together and they are brought to where they are needed by the cell. And so this is an example, computer animation. But I remember vividly when we started to see the movies that this is based upon, the data, and it just changed everything about how we understand how cells work. So in other words, the entire description of life at the cellular level was turned on its head, and what was assumed to be random and purposeless, we could now see was a carefully orchestrated and purposeful activity. And just to be clear, the old view that cells could function through random motions of molecules, that theory was never proven, and in fact, all the evidence we had said that it couldn't actually work. But the random model was vigorously defended for years since, well, it's assumed we live in a random, purposeless universe. And it took the invention of new microscopic techniques for the diffusion model to be proven false. In other words, we had to see it with our own eyes.
The gospel of Jesus Christ embraces panpsychism, where all nature is alive, intelligent, and purposeful. Science calls the intelligence pervading the universe consciousness. The Lord's term for it is the light of Christ. While the leading edge of science recognizes consciousness, its understanding is very limited. After all, they can only observe and measure its effects. Consciousness can only be understood indirectly. Still, it offers a framework for contemporary Latter-day Saints to understand what consciousness or the light of Christ is. Jesus Christ, and through him, Joseph Smith has a more direct understanding of consciousness. After all, it is his light. By combining the two notions, consciousness and the light of Christ, we will be able to come to a better understanding of both. One of the defining characteristics of consciousness is that it is fundamental. It is the building foundation for all things living. This is the case with the light of Christ. The light of Christ is the animating force for all things. Consciousness and the light of Christ are the foundation for all life and living beings in the universe. For consciousness to be fundamental to all things in the universe, it must also be two other things, eternal and infinite. It is omnipresent in both time and space. Science has found this to be the case. The light of Christ is also infinite and eternal, as the Scriptures have attested. Consciousness and the light of Christ are both eternal and infinite. Implicit in the idea that consciousness and the light of Christ are infinite in space is another idea, interconnectedness. When all beings in the universe have consciousness and the light of Christ, then there must be some form of interconnectedness. After all, this is what the word universe means. Consciousness and the light of Christ connect the parts of the universe into a coherent whole. Another characteristic of both consciousness and the light of Christ is governance. They are the power that governs the universe and instills order. In its most basic form, governance is the ability to bring stability and order into a system, usually in an organization. The light of Christ, also called the light of truth, is the law and power by which God governs and rules within his sphere. Consciousness, in scientific parlance, also governs. It brings order to otherwise chaotic physical systems. Both consciousness and the light of Christ are the power of governance, bringing order to the universe. As we have discussed previously, creation is a process of organization, bringing chaotic or lower forms of matter into order or more highly ordered matter. That is, creation is a form of governance, imposing higher levels of order on lower levels of physical systems. Therefore, it is not surprising that the light of Christ is also the power by which all celestial bodies in the universe are created from unorganized matter. Though no claim has been made that planets, stars, and galaxies were formed by a conscious effort, the implication is there. The universe is alive and interconnected, not dead and random. Everything in the universe is now purposeful and ordered. This can only mean that both consciousness and the light of Christ are creative powers, organizing new living objects in the universe. In passing, we should note that Joseph Smith, in his first lecture on faith, declared that faith is the first great governing principle of the universe. This is not a contradiction. Faith, as we have reasoned before, is merely the exercise of consciousness, or, as the prophet put it, mental exertion. Consciousness and the light of Christ are principles of knowledge, intelligence, and awareness. Consciousness, according to the 1828 Webster Dictionary, consists of knowledge of sensation and mental operations. Modern dictionaries define consciousness as awareness, especially of oneself and one's immediate surroundings. But it is more than the knowledge or awareness of an individual's inner workings and surroundings. Consciousness makes possible knowledge of things past, present, and future, and throughout infinite space. Consciousness transcends space and time. The light of Christ, as the light of truth, gives a knowledge of things as they are, were, and are to come. There's a rational basis for this concept. It is the deep and pervasive interconnectedness of all things that make it possible for any single intelligent being to be aware of all other things. To be connected is also to be aware. It is through these infinite and eternal connections that God comprehends all things. This would also mean that all things are aware of God and also of each other. In an infinite web of consciousness, there is no single focal point or center, but only an infinite number of interconnected intelligent beings. Furthermore, the animating power of consciousness also enables understanding. Awareness becomes understanding. Consciousness and the light of Christ are the principle and power underlying infinite and timeless knowledge and understanding of the universe and everything therein. Consciousness is more than just the awareness of the whole by each constituent part. It is more than knowledge. Consciousness and the light of Christ give the power of discernment, especially an ability to discern between good and evil, right and wrong, guilt and innocence. This capacity has always been inherent in the original meaning of consciousness. The 1928 Webster's Dictionary gave the following definition of consciousness. Modern dictionaries have used the word conscience for this attribute of consciousness when retaining the original reference. The Bible Dictionary correctly observes that conscience is merely an aspect of self-awareness. Dr. Michael Claridge's idea that the universe is purposeful requires that there is an ultimate good, a purpose to strive for. This implies that consciousness can recognize purpose and act towards that end. Dr. Dean Radin's suggestion that consciousness brings order follows this same line of thinking. Order, a particular order, is the purpose, the good of universal intelligent behavior. Whatever this sense or pattern of behavior is, the striving for purpose or order, it is desirable to consciousness and guides its conduct. In other words, it is acting as a conscience. Purpose and order also suggest that there is an underlying moral structure to the universe, encompassing both a value system and the material basis of the universe. The Book of Mormon prophet Lehi explained to his son Jacob that the universal order is one of opposites and is essential to existence, ultimate purpose, and to God Himself. Given that the order of the universe is one of opposition in all things, as Lehi termed it, all conscious beings must be aware of this opposition. The consciousness and the light of Christ, as we pointed out earlier, give this awareness. Given that this opposition constitutes the underlying moral structure of the universe, all conscious beings must be able to discern between the opposites. This ability would be conscious. Of course, these opposites must be able to attract the interest of a conscious being, just as the electrical or gravitational force do in physical terms. Lehi called this enticement. This is the whole point of the morality play of the two trees in the Garden of Eden, as Lehi expressly pointed out. The LDS endowment also makes this point. Whereas consciousness seeks after order and the purposeful, the light of Christ gives the discernment of the opposites of good and evil. In summary, consciousness and the light of Christ give all intelligent beings the ability to discern between the moral opposites which form the basis of the universe. They are the conscience of man. With opposition in all things as the basis of the universe, and with consciousness and the light of Christ providing all conscious life the ability to discern that opposition, the principle of action and agency come into play. Knowledge and discernment are not simply passive attributes. Both lead to choice and action. All things, as Lehi explained, become both things that act and that are acted upon. The ability to act is a direct result of the opposition. There must be a choice between one or the other. The light of Christ, as we learned, is independent and can act for itself. This ability to act according to one's conscience is called the agency of man. All conscious beings also have the power to act and make choices. Dean Radin points out that mind, by which he means consciousness, can focus its attention to bring about order. This is the very nature of choice and acting upon that choice. Both consciousness and the light of Christ give intelligent beings the ability to act within the moral structure of the universe. This ability is called agency. And we must point out that not all intelligent beings elect to choose the good or the purposeful. This was the case with the planet Mraz. Still, if the vast preponderance of intelligent life in the universe did not choose the good or order, the universe could not function. It would devolve into chaos. Now, we have previously discussed the age-old question of mind-body dualism, where there is a distinction in nature between mind or consciousness and matter. The first is non-physical, and the second is physical. We stated previously that the gospel of Jesus Christ is monistic, where there is no distinction between mind and body. We used Joseph Smith's instructions in section 131 to back up this claim. Joseph declared to the saints that there is no such thing as immateriality. Everything is composed of matter. This means that there is no mind-body duality. For the mind, or as we call it here, consciousness, is made up of matter, just as the body is. It is simply more refined matter. And while the scientific debate continues, some scientists are finding that there is no mind-body duality. Dean Radin suggests that there is no dualism at all. Mind and matter are a single phenomenon. The illusion of dualism is an artifact of language, not physical reality. What Radin is saying is that mind or consciousness is, by nature, composed of matter. This leads us to the important conclusion that consciousness and the light of Christ are composed of matter. It is matter that is more refined or pure than what we can see with our physical eyes, or, for that matter, scientific instruments. Consciousness and the light of Christ have knowledge, discernment, and agency, the ability to act. Now, with these attributes, they also have power. One of the definitions of power, after all, is to act effectively. By power, we mean the possession of control, authority, or influence over other intelligent beings or things. It can also be defined as the capacity to act or being acted upon. Now, this brings us back to Lehi, who said that all things can both act and be acted upon. The difference between acting and being acted upon in power is that power brings an effect as a result of the action. Now, we know that faith, or mental intent as Joseph defined it, can produce miraculous effects. When exercising faith, which is synonymous with focusing consciousness, there's nothing a man cannot do. Joseph Smith declared that faith was more than belief and more than a principle of action. It was a principle of power. The Apostle Paul recounted many of the examples of the miraculous effects of faith throughout the sacred histories. Some scientists accept this form of power, the ability of the mind to affect matter. It is called psychokinesis, mind-matter interaction, or telekinesis. There have been numerous experiments demonstrating the effects of mind-matter interaction on dice and random number generators. In both cases, the results indicate that psychokinesis is real. Of course, this is small potatoes when compared to moving mountains and planets or parting the sea. Still, large-scale effects are theoretically possible, knowing that any psychokinetic effect, like electricity, is scalable. In essence, then, consciousness and the light of Christ exert power over matter and can cause an effect on all things. It is one thing to say that such effects exist, that mind or consciousness or the light of Christ themselves, a form of matter, can act upon or create an effect on other forms of matter. It is another thing to explain how this happens. How does mind interact and affect matter? Scientific experiments suggest that the basis of psychokinesis, the interaction between mind and matter, is really an exchange of information. It is not physical power per se, but a mind telling matter to act in a particular way. To use the most famous example of psychokinesis, the bending of spoons by Uri Geller, Geller did not use his mind to physically force the spoon to bend, but rather passed a mental command to the spoon to bend, to which it responded. In this video clip, Maya does the same thing, bending and breaking a spoon solely through mental focus. Not only does psychokinesis or mind-matter interaction not exert physical force, it likely does not involve energy at any level. According to Dr. Dean Radin, contrary to long-held assumptions, the transmission of information requires no minimum energy. That is, information between minds or between mind and matter, irrespective of distance, passes free of any energy requirements. Consciousness has the power to act upon matter in a powerful way. This reality can be expressed in a very simple principle. As the mind moves, so moves matter. The mind moves matter through the communication of intent. The light of Christ works in exactly the same way. Now, we have previously equated the light of Christ with the word of the Lord. We did so through the law of transitivity, found in this revelation to Joseph Smith. According to the Apostle Paul in his epistle to the Hebrews, it was by the Word of God through faith that the planets were formed at the creation. Joseph Smith used Paul's epistle to the Hebrews as the basis for his lecture on faith as a principle of power. It is through faith that all the miraculous deeds and events recorded in the Scriptures came to be, from the creation forward. But faith was affected in a particular way and in a particular sequence. In every case, the initiator of the miracle, whether it was God or man, first spoke. A command was given, the Word of God. What was spoken was the intent of the speaker, what he wanted done. This is what Dr. Radin expressed as transmitting information. It appears that the vocalization of intent both directs and focuses that intent. In the case of man, the name of God was invoked. The intent, information, and command were addressed to particular intelligent entities: chaos, sun, moon, mountains, lions, and human heart, fire, armies, and so forth. Joseph Smith was clear that the vocal transmission of intent did not physically force the entities addressed to act as commanded. As intelligent beings, they heard and obeyed the commands. From this, we derive the following correlation between consciousness and the light of Christ. This particular attribute of consciousness and the light of Christ follows well-established magical principles. The overall magical principle is, appropriately, called the law of magic. The law of magic states that any change in consciousness will directly dictate a corresponding change in the world. Or, as Radin put it, as the mind moves, so moves matter. A second law of magic is the law of names. If you name something, you then have power over the thing that was named. This allows you to address that thing and direct or command it to do what you want. Before commanding the sun and moon to stand still, Joshua first addressed them by name. So, too, in the case of the planet Meroz. The planet was cursed by name. Now, presumably, it was originally commanded by name to help Israel. As might be expected, there is a magical principle associated with words of power. Now, certain words, when used with mental intent, can act upon matter or other intelligent beings. There is another magical principle in play here. It's called the law of decree. In essence, it postulates that there is a hierarchy of intelligence or soul, whereby higher souls command lesser souls, or the universe at large, who, in turn, must obey. The Lord explicitly informed Abraham that both celestial bodies and spirits exist within a hierarchy. And when there are two spirits, one is always greater than the other, with God being the greatest of all. Atop the hierarchy of intelligences or souls is God. He's more intelligent than all other intelligences. Because of his preeminent intelligence, God possesses all things and all things are subject to his will. Intelligence and the light of Christ follow the law of decree. This is the essence of the plan of salvation, the attainment of godhood, whereby a man increases in intelligence until he possesses all things, and all things become subject to him. Therefore, there is a power structure among conscious beings and intelligences. The more intelligence or the light of Christ a conscious being attains, the more he rises in the hierarchy, and the more power he attains until he has power over all things. Now, we have pointed out earlier that there is a moral structure to the universe. Consciousness and the light of Christ are able to discern the opposites within the moral structure, between the good and the bad. But consciousness and the light of Christ extend beyond merely discerning between good and evil, order and disorder, and then acting upon that discernment. There is also a direct relationship between righteousness and the ability to wield power within the moral universe. As the Lord informed Joseph Smith in Liberty Jail, the powers of heaven can only be controlled upon the principles of righteousness. Righteousness, as it was used in Joseph's time, referred to purity and the strict conformity to divine law. Sin, on the other hand, is the willful violation of divine law. In order to attain the status of godhood and achieve ultimate power over all things, a man must be purified from all sin, or, in other words, perfectly conform to divine law. Like the physical universe, the moral universe requires the most efficient form of the transmission and use of power. In the moral universe, this is called righteousness. This provides another common attribute of consciousness and the light of Christ. Both are most effective when handled upon principles of righteousness. In the magical world and in the realm of the gospel, lower intelligences can access the power of higher intelligences. They do this through the use of the name of the higher intelligence. This is achieved through the laws of names and words of power. In other words, the name of a higher being becomes a word of power. We have discussed this principle in its gospel usage, where the name of Christ can be used to command and exert tremendous power. According to Moroni, a person can do anything in the name of Christ. The promise extends to all, member and non-member alike. Joseph Smith explained in his first lecture on faith that when speaking in faith in the name of God, a man may command the sun, moon, mountains, fire, and armies according to his will. Death can even be overturned. This is the sealing power, where a man can bind or control a higher being, in this case the Lord, and wield his higher power. The ancient Book of Mormon prophet Nephi used this power to seal up the heavens, causing famine on earth. The principle is this: one conscious being, or one with the light of Christ, can exercise the power of another higher being by using that higher being's name.